Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to get started here shortly in just a moment. But while you're waiting, it would be great if you could put your name, where you're coming from, and any affiliation you have in the chat so that we can all get acquainted. Thank you.
I am the clown, never one thing, no, not one thing at all. I'm a street fighter, I'm a prayer for peace. I'm a holy roller, I'm a honeybee. I am the truth, I am a lie. I am the ground, I am the sky. I am the silence, I am the call. Never one thing, no, not one thing at all. I'm the underbelly, I am the claw. Never one thing, no, not one thing at all. I'm a street fighter, I'm a breath for peace. I'm a holy roller, I'm a honeybee. I am hope, I am defeat. I am broken, I am complete. I am the grace, I am the fall. Never one thing, no, not one thing at all. I'm the underbelly, I am the claw. Never one thing, no, not one thing at all. I'm a street fighter, I'm a prayer for peace. I'm a holy roller, I'm a honeybee. I am the beggar, I am the queen. I am the end, I am the means. I am the hammer, I am the wall. Never one thing, no, not one thing at all. I'm the underbelly, I am the claw. Never one thing, no, not one thing at all. I'm a street fighter, I'm a prayer for peace. I'm a holy roller, I'm a honeybee. I am a victor, I am the loss. I am a prophet, I am the cost. I am the sign, I am the sting. Never know, never one thing. I'm the underbelly, I am the claw. Never one thing, no, not one thing at all. I'm a street fighter, I'm a prayer for peace. I'm a holy roller, I'm a honeybee. I am the mother, I am the child. I am the meek, I am the wild. I am the witch, I am the saint. I am alive, never one thing. I'm the underbelly, I am the claw. Never one thing, no, not one thing at all. I'm a street fighter, I'm a prayer for peace. I'm a holy roller, I'm a honeybee. I am the lion, I am the swan. I am the bull, I am the fawn. I am a woman, I am the rain. I am my own, never one thing. I'm the underbelly, I am the claw. Never one thing, no, not one thing at all. I'm a street fighter, I'm a prayer for peace. I'm a holy roller, I'm a honeybee.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Ronnie Boyd, and I'm the Community Faith and Justice Organizer with EBHO, East Bay Housing Organizations. And if you're new to EBHO and who we are a member-driven organization working to preserve, protect, and create affordable housing opportunities for low-income communities in the East Bay. This event is hosted by EBHO's Faith and Justice Committee, who has the mission of staying active in ways that will help us organize communities using faith as a compass, and we work through service advocacy, through service work and advocacy to create a structure of love around the unhoused and housing insecure. So we wanted to do this panel discussion to give our members and the general public a glimpse into why organizing for housing justice is so important in this moment, particularly from a faith lens, as communities of faith are called to bear some responsibility in housing the unhoused. And tonight we have 3 faith leaders joining us that are going to be sharing their experiences as I guide us through a series of questions. So with us, we have Leslie Gleason from the Trinity Center, which is a non-residential program serving homeless and working poor adult men and women in Walnut Creek and Central Contra Costa County. Minister Demetrius Burnett, who is an associate minister at Allen Temple Baptist Church in Oakland. And he also works as a program officer for the San Francisco Foundation. And then we have EBHO's very own Reverend Sophia DeWitt, who is the program director and also an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. So I'm gonna let them share a bit about themselves.
Hello, everybody. It is wonderful to be with you tonight. I'm here to share hopes and thoughts about the future by reflecting on the past and what we've been able to accomplish in the past to lead us into the future. My past includes an arc running all the way from working in a local nonprofit up through state and county government, and then back to nonprofits with Trinity Center. And I got into this field and have stayed in this field ever since because of some events that happened in my early life when I was exposed to literally the life and death situations that people experiencing homelessness faced on the streets of cold and snowy Boston way back when. It was a long time ago. And unfortunately, we're still fighting these issues. Those experiences marched me right into the doors of a nonprofit, one of the first serving homeless women in Boston. And ever since then, it's been my personal mission to develop leaders in the fight to address homelessness. And those leaders come from every part of my life. They're my sisters and brothers and siblings in faith. They are the people that I serve every day at Trinity Center. They are our public leaders, and they are my neighbors on the street, not to mention my family. So I see it as my mission to help others see their part in addressing homelessness as just one of a myriad of social justice issues. I think also why it's important to me is I really, really know it could be anybody who ends up becoming homeless. My brother and his family almost became homeless, and I was astonished at the lack of resources in his community. So I want to be part of a community where if we can't eliminate the root causes of homelessness, at least we can create and maintain a safety net so that if people do fall into homelessness, that there are people there to catch them and help them see a road out of homelessness for themselves and their children and their future. So I'm pleased to be with everybody tonight.
Great, good evening, everyone. And Leslie, it's great to be on the panel with you. Thank you to Ronnie and EBHO for having me be a part of this occasion. Again, my name is Demetrius Burnett. I'm the program officer for the PLACE pathway at the San Francisco Foundation. But actually, before I got to the foundation, I was the interfaith program coordinator at EBHO. So as far as Ronnie, her current role is the current iteration of what I did two people ago, excuse me, at EBHO. So working with you all great people, many of you who are here on the call today, around organizing and advocacy for affordable housing policy, and including some good time that I got with the resident organizing program, especially towards the end. Aside from my time at EBHO, I also previously served as a youth pastor in Richmond. So a lot of my time in the Bay Area, I came here for seminary as well, served as a youth pastor in Richmond and South Richmond, in particular off of Cutting Boulevard. And now as a program officer, as a minister at Allen Temple in East Oakland, my experience has been rooted in faith and housing. And that's what has brought me to the region, what has brought me and kept me in the work, including some of the work I do now involving homelessness prevention.
Good evening, everyone. Happy to be with you and to be with the panel. Great to be able to share with Leslie and Demetrius tonight our reflections on housing justice as a faith principle and how we have seen that through our lives and through our work. I'm Reverend Sophia DeWitt. I serve as program director at East Bay Housing Organizations. And I've been with EBHO a little less than 3 years, a little more actually than 3 years at this point. Time flies when you're having fun. And before that, I've been involved in housing justice work and housing justice advocacy for 20 years in a variety of roles. More than a decade of that was spent in my hometown of Fresno in the Central Valley, working with a local nonprofit, faith-based nonprofit that worked with refugee and new immigrant communities to the Central Valley and provided a whole range of services from preschool up to senior services, and I worked in all those areas, but really focused my time on housing justice and healthcare access work, and cut my teeth, got my first exposure to the issues that people face through doing landlord-tenant rights and responsibilities education and work with brand new refugees and immigrants, folks with language and cultural barriers, and learn through that experience both the myriad of challenges people face when they're housing insecure or when they are afflicted with a bad landlord, but also about the resilience of people and the power that faith has for individuals to help them move forward in their own lives and to request and demand changes for their families and their communities. So after that work at FIRM, the name of that organization, I worked for a few years with a couple other groups doing similar kinds of work before coming to EBHO. So I look forward to sharing with all of you and learning from each other about this important work of seeing housing justice as a faith principle and rooted in our faith. And that has been the way that I've seen it. For me, social justice is the deep core of my call to ministry, and it's the way I understand my faith. So look forward to sharing much more with everyone tonight. Thanks.
Ronnie, it looks like you're muted.
There we go. So let's hop right in. At first, I want to say thank you for those introductions. And let's get started. First, we're going to be collecting questions in the chat box. So if you have a question for our panelists, please put them in the chat, and we'll address them during the Q&A portion at the end. We aren't going to be taking live questions. Okay. So the first question I have for the panelists to ground us in this discussion is, what role do you think people of faith should have in social justice movements? And we can start with Demetrius.
Sure. I'll go in and hop in first. What role people of faith should have in social justice movements? I think first in answering that, it's important to understand that people of faith have always been an integral role in social justice movements. And in many ways, we can't underestimate the role of faith. There are some studies that say that people involved in justice movements and social transformation last longer when they have some form of faith practice, regardless of what it is, or some type of spiritual practice, whether that's with a formal religion or not. It's longer. So one important reason connected to that is that people of faith are needed for the sustaining of the movement. We need people who are continued grounded in spirit, grounded in faith, grounded in hope as well. That's one of the things I loved about my role at EBHO, is doing like the interfaith breakfast, and recognizing was that part of the main result, aside from moving towards a policy or action, was reinvigorating hope and what hope means for what we see in the future. And then finally, I'd say, before I take all the talking points, is that people of faith can help give prophetic vision. You know, I think this shows up in many forms. It can show up, yes, in the clergy, but it can show up in poets. It can show up in artists, a regular person who sees the things that are not as though they were, that sees a future that doesn't exist yet, but shares it and speaks it and expresses it in a way that other people can see, that compels and calls us to go and create that thing together in accordance with the will of God and of spirit. So that's what role I think faith community should play in social movements.
Thank you. Leslie, do you want to go next?
Great. Thank you, Demetrius. I'm always inspired when I hear you. I think for me, a role, there are many, many roles that people of faith can take, but for me, the highest hope is that it's a way to give concrete action to our beliefs, that we believe in a future that can be different from the one we have now. We believe in a future for everybody that includes everybody, that there's a role for everybody, and that no one is apart from the love and support and constant presence of God. And because we believe that, we believe in that vision, we can make it happen. It's easy to let go of a vision or a goal when you're not really invested in it, when you don't have, as Demetrius has said, the sustaining power that comes from our faith. So the role for people of faith in social justice movements is, one, to believe it can happen, whatever the vision is, and to make it happen. And we make it happen by leading within our communities of faith and leading the wider world to take risks, and equally important, to involve others. I think, for me anyway, one of the beauties of being part of a faith community is that it's about involving others. It's not just me in my little head trip, or me thinking only about my personal relationship with God, as important as that is, but that it involves others. Living as part of a faith community involves others, and so too must our social justice movements. And finally, when we're at our very best, and sometimes as people of faith we aren't, we have to acknowledge the troubled history that sometimes our faith communities have brought to these very issues that we're wrestling with today. But if nothing else, our faith communities and we as people of faith can be a voice for values that go far beyond economic values, that go far beyond the return of it on investment, that speak to the life-changing, deep, connective, flowing, bold, audacious values that we have. So for me, those are some of the ways that people of faith can actively involve and be part of and lead and urge forward social movements of all kinds. Thank you.
So I want to go back to something that Demetrius said at the very beginning. When we consider what should be the role of faith communities in social justice movements, we need to recognize what has been the role of faith communities in social justice movements in our history. And indeed, there has not been a single social justice movement in the history of our country that hasn't had significant leadership and presence from communities of faith. If you have been watching this week, the beautiful documentary series that Henry Louis Gates Jr. did on the history of the Black church in the US. And if you haven't, I encourage you to check it out. No matter your faith perspective, I think you'll find it enlightening and inspiring. But if you have had a chance to watch that or any part of that, you will know that the Black church in America has been involved in social justice struggles since well before the Revolutionary War, and consistently working for the uplift of the African American community and through the uplift of the African American community for the betterment of the entire community. And obviously we see that as well in what happened in the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, otherwise known as the US freedom movement, the US freedom struggle. Which was led, yes, it was led by, or one of the key leaders that we all think of, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, he's a Baptist pastor. You cannot separate the work of that movement from his the fact that he was a pastor and that he was formed by that and by his Christian faith. But it was not only, so he might have been the leader and the figurehead, but what gave the movement energy and life were the thousands of lay people in the Black church. And let's give it up for the Black women who, 80% of the church in a lot of places, who said, yes, it's time. We're tired of being mistreated. We will march. We will organize. We'll do the behind the scenes work for these events. But they were the energy and the oxygen and the heart and the soul of the movement. And white churches have been involved as well. My own denomination and several other denominational groups that tend to be more white have been very involved in social justice movements throughout time, throughout American history, helped with the creation of schools for freed African Americans after the Civil War, which became a lot of the universities and HBCUs that continue to exist in the South of the United States and around the country. Clearly, there's a lot that was done incorrectly or could have been done better, but there has been involvement across the spectrum. And of course, thinking of the civil rights movement, we know that that the Jewish community was very involved as well. Reverend Abraham Joshua Heschel was a close confidant of Martin Luther King and got many other Jewish religious leaders involved in the movements as well. So we need to recognize the ways in which the communities have been involved in the past. And so for me, what that says is anytime the church or faith community is not involved in social justice movements, they are not living up to the fullness of what they're called to, and they're not doing what they have been shown by their ancestors in faith that they should do. So communities of faith have a key role in social justice movements. They can bring perspective and words of wisdom to social justice fights that other communities, other individuals cannot. And so that's a really important element. And it's important for communities of faith to be engaged in today's social justice struggles.
Thank you. So my next question is more personal. What prompted you as a person of faith to organize for housing justice? And this time we can start with Leslie.
Happy to. I've already shared my personal urgency about this issue, but as a person of faith, let's say my brother hadn't gone through those experiences. Let's say I hadn't volunteered at Rosie's Place and understood by being with people what the experience of homelessness meant. Still, for me, the golden rule would apply. If we can't want for others what we want for ourselves, then something's a little off there. So for me, as trite as it may sound, the golden rule is really what prompts me every day to organize for housing justice. I want to live, I said before, I want to live in a world where if the worst case scenario happens to me, someone's there to help. So I have to be part of helping create that world for others and maintaining it and bringing it about with compassion and love and understanding, recognizing that people find themselves in all sorts of situations beyond their control or seemingly beyond their control until they get a place where they can rest, get their basics taken care of, and really even see themselves restored to the fullness of life. So for me, it's the golden rule, do unto others. And there's so many ways we can do that in small ways, just by how we treat each other, by how we give each other a smile. Someone talked about the isolation earlier today, of the isolation that people experiencing homelessness feel, the invisibility. So that golden rule can be as much as just giving someone a smile when you see them on the street so that they know that they matter to somebody, all the way up to building housing and building tons and tons of housing, and advocating for laws that protect people who are marginalized economically and socially, and preventing worst case scenarios wherever we can. We are a very wealthy country. We're a very affluent area. We can do better than we are. And we need to, because we are only as strong as the least of us. My colleague at Trinity Center, Pam, talks about a thriving community as one in which the least, the person who has the least, is thriving also. And that's what motivates me as my connection between spirituality and social justice, because I can't want it for myself and not want it equally hard for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in next.
Yeah.
For me, I'd actually grown up seeing housing as ministry because my mother was a real estate agent and broker for most of my life. So even in the traditional world of residential real estate, I saw her work her hardest, take the most care to take clients that others wouldn't. Just a lot of realtors get scared off by people who have Section 8, or even just people who are looking to rent. And she would give the greatest service to make sure people got all of their needs and as much of what they could afford of their wants in the housing that they lived in. And while also, it presented little times and opportunities for ministry in the interpersonal aspects of the relationship that she built with her clients, whether she knew them before or not. So for me, again, coming to the Bay Area, I'd actually gotten licensed in Arizona for real estate just like maybe a week or two before moving here because it was a sudden change for school. And by the time I got out of seminary, I'd had really just a incredible radicalization. Michael Brown was murdered and Darren Wilson was acquitted within it was the fall of my second year in seminary after a year of Changemaker Fellowship and starting to become more aware of what social justice meant versus just community service. And then while also being planted in the historical Black church, and one that I would say is connected to the true Black church, more like the legacy you heard Reverend Sophia talking about. So for me, by the time being there, I'm in the church at a seminary rooted in giving theological grounding and education to social change agents. In that moment in my life, I had an opportunity to lean into what it meant for me to be both man and minister, in particular, what it meant for me to be Black man and minister in the United States at this time and how to live out that call. So when I graduated, I knew like all the streams had to flow together. I needed something that was systems change. I needed some way to use this housing background. I needed some way to still walk in the fullness of my faith and answer that question for myself in everyday practice. So that's what led me to working with the faith community in particular around housing advocacy and in my home here in the Bay Area.
I was led to housing justice by what may seem a slightly circuitous route, but as I mentioned before, I have really seen and experienced the core of my call to ministry to be about social justice advocacy. So that was clear to me early on, and social justice and working for justice was from an early age core to what I understood it to be, what I understood it to mean to live out my faith as a Christian, even before I knew that I was going to be called into ministry, even to just be, a lay Christian. I felt that working for justice was important. So the justice piece was always central. The housing piece came a little bit later. When I when I was in seminary, I thought that I wanted to do and felt really called to do urban ministry. And I before going to seminary, I had lived here in the Bay Area and gone to college here in the East Bay at Mills College, and I really liked the Bay Area, and I wanted to return, and I wanted to start my ministry life in the Bay Area. And I went back to Atlanta for seminary, first time living outside of California. That was a big shift and a big switch, but it was very good for me. But I had always assumed that I would, come back to the Bay Area, and I felt drawn to urban ministry. And so I assumed that I might be working in an African American or a Latino neighborhood at some point in the future. I wanted to work directly with people and help address their needs and help them build hope for the future. And it was while I was in seminary, I was also in law school for a while. That's a much longer story. Ask me sometime or ask me later tonight. And I came out to the Bay Area to do a summer internship with a legal advocacy, housing legal advocacy organization that EBHO partners with, called the National Housing Law Project. And it was the first time that I had done research. They asked me to do a research study related to public housing authorities all over the country and policies that they were implementing and how they were working or not working for housing authority clients. And it was the first time that I really dug deep into a policy issue, and I began to understand how things were not working for folks. And so that piqued my interest. And then when I finished seminary, I came back to California. I didn't have a position immediately lined up. And so I came back to the Central Valley, and I read, after a few months, I read an article in the local paper right at the beginning of what became the housing bubble that burst in 2008, of a Southern California real estate investment company that was buying 9 low rent properties owned by the Central Valley's largest slumlord, and was going to make many deferred repairs, but then of course raise more than double the rent. And everyone in those 9 apartment buildings, 1,100 families, was going to have to move out because no one had the financial resources to absorb the rent increase. Fresno didn't have tenant protection laws, pretty much still doesn't. And all the families were going to have to move out. And all the families were predominantly, they were Latino, they were Southeast Asian immigrant families with, culture and language barriers towards the white culture, and everyone was scared and everyone didn't know what to do. And this article referenced a Presbyterian pastor who had lived for more than a decade in one of these complexes and who ran the refugee agency where I ended up spending the first 11 years of my ministry, saying, we've run various programs, but we've never had to deal with housing, and I just don't know what to do. And I thought, well, I've done an internship in housing law, so let me go and help out. And very quickly, it became clear that this is where I was called, and this is the work that I needed to invest my life in. And it really started with accompanying families to eviction court on a continuous basis and just watching for days and days and hours people get serially evicted, or I mean, one person after another getting evicted, with having no legal support, no understanding in many cases what was happening, you know, and just seeing the systemic injustice of that, and just realizing like this is where you need to put your life. And that was the start of it. And my ministry and my work there and in housing justice grew over the years to the place that it is now.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that with us, Sophia and Demetrius and Leslie. I have the next question. I'm going to ask, how has organizing for housing justice changed the way you see your neighbors? And I'm going to ask that we try to be as shorten the answers as best as possible, because I have a list of questions here and I want to be able to get to them tonight. So we can start, we can just popcorn it. Whoever feels compelled to go first. Unless I need to call on somebody.
I'll pop in.
Okay.
It's kind of a mixed bag, honestly. Just like every other slice of people, there are going to be people who see it the way I do and the way we do, and people who don't. So working in housing justice has crystallized that feeling. But what I also realize is that my neighbors, our neighbors, are scared, and we're all subject to the same fears and mythologies about each other. So I would love to think that neighbors can always be our friends and advocates, but they're not always coming from that place. So then what is my role as a person of faith to build the bridge, to help them see beyond whatever limitations they see, to help them turn what they see as a negative into a positive. So I guess in the end, I would say my view of neighbors now is they're a challenge. They're a challenge, and I love a challenge. And the work we do is challenging, and it challenges all sorts of norms and ideas about others, as we try to create a world where people see each other as us, not other. So there's my popcorn.
Yeah, I would say working in housing justice has expanded my view of not just who my neighbors are, but also helps me understand who they are and humanizes. I think oftentimes when it comes to homelessness in particular, or when it comes to economic or housing security, we see data, we see numbers. But the difference in working in this is that I have actual people, actual humans, narratives that I'm in relationship with, you know, or who, depending on the context, I've at least heard their story of. So it's not just those people. And what it does is, and when I say that in community, and when you hear it in conversation, or even to myself. So I think that being said too, whenever you build more relationship with someone, or, you know, now I know so many seniors who are advocates and organizers in their buildings. I have real people that it raises an accountability in my conversations with others, or what narratives I allow to be around me, and or what narratives that I'm intentional about bringing to different spaces that I'm invited to or that I'm already in at that moment. So it has added a more human element to what's typically defined by data, and raised the accountability for you know, being accountable to loving your neighbor when they're not in the room with you and other people can't see them as well as you've learned to.
Yeah, I would agree with Demetrius in the sense that for me, it's broadened and also deepened my sense of um, who is my neighbor. That famous question that the lawyer asked to Jesus um, uh, as Jesus began to tell the parable of the Good Samaritan. I think about a very early time when I was just out of seminary and just starting to work at the refugee organization in landlord tenant rights. And I met an older Laotian gentleman who was in his 70s, and he was facing eviction, and he didn't know what to do, um, didn't speak much English. Together with my colleague who spoke Laotian, we were trying to help him through his situation of housing insecurity. But he was very afraid, and he said at the end of one of the first times we met together, like, I'm just really afraid and I don't know what to do. Um, can we pray? And he asked me to pray, and I remember feeling insufficient to the moment, and not wanting to, I knew he was Buddhist, and so I wanted to pray in a way that respected his faith belief. And so, I was nervous, and I was feeling a lot of pain for him and his situation. But we sat there and we prayed in a circle, and we became a little community in that moment. And he became my neighbor in a new way. And I'll also say that it also deepens what I understand about who is a neighbor. When I think about those who have a different viewpoint than I do, who are in opposition to what I'm trying to do, and it makes me really consider and be prayerful about the language I use and the way I carry myself in the world, to try to think about how to reach and build relationships and build bridges with those folks as well, and also to understand them as my neighbors. And what does that mean?
Okay. So can you describe a moment when your values, when you were moved by your values and it produced a positive result?
I'd say for me, as I was thinking about this question, it's more about the daily course of work in the use of values. And I lift that up because I think at times we continue to look for historic moments of putting our values in action, especially as we think about past social movements and people of faith, like Dr. King and so many more. But each day in my role as a program officer, I have to work for my values, which can include looking for my blind spots so that I can say the most true to them. So each time I go to make a recommendation or in conversation with someone else who may be making the decision, but they ask for my opinion or what I know from the field, being clear to center the Black community, to center Latinx, Indigenous communities and people of color, to center low-income families, to bring forth the narratives that I learned being in conversation with you all, to say that through this targeted approach, we can raise the tide for everyone. each grant that I make, each way that I go about trying to move strategy and thinking throughout the institution or the sector, and even more, is a practicing of values. And I think it's just really important to understand how transformational that is and how we live in every decision that we make and how we learn when we don't. Is that's where it's really making an overall difference in the way that I live and an actual impact in the work that I do.
Mm.
I want to second something that Demetrius said. And I remember when one of my mentors said to me, expect ministry to take longer than you think. Expect to go slowly. And that was hard for me because, I see injustice in the world. I want to fix it, or at least I want to make progress on fixing it. Like I want to see the bad stuff gone. But really, so much of ministry, so much of moving from your faith and your values is about the daily decisions that you make, the dailiness of the work, taking time to have that conversation with someone who comes into your office at just the time, and it's always at just the time when you're like, goodness gracious, I need time to myself. I don't want anybody in my office. I have to get these 5 things done in the next hour. Leslie's shaking her head. I know this is, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's always then that somebody comes in and says, can I talk to you? Or someone has an emergency or something, right? But it's taking the time to build those relationships through that. That is really the core to me of moving from one's faith, or allowing one's faith to move you in the work. It's not all, roses and big celebrations, but it's all important.
I just want to apologize to Sophia because I'm sure I was that person in the office on multiple occasions.
Good. It's all good. And sometimes those moments of grace are the ones that replenish us, even when we thought we were at our rope's end. So I am really glad to be able to share not my moment where my values created a positive impact, but to bear witness to the time when that happened for a whole community of people. So I'm going to try and share my screen here, and it's not coming up. There we go. So this is the beautiful St. Paul's Commons. And this is the building that love built. That's how I like to describe it. This is the building that love built. When you look at this picture here straight ahead, you're seeing the apartments, 3 stories of apartments, 44 housing units, a resident manager, a community room, space for computers, a resident services, everything you could want. And that's really important for people exiting homelessness or who have other challenges. It's not just enough sometimes to have the house, to have the home, but it needs to be a home where if you fall short, someone's going to be there to back you up. When you can't quite get it together, you're going to have an understanding property manager and people around you to support you. So building housing is super important, but the right kind of housing with the right supports is important for a lot of people too. And this beautiful building was built in partnership with the church you see over on the left of the picture, that's St. Paul's Episcopal Church, and Resources for Community Development. And they, with Trinity Center and the inspiration of our founding executive director, Donna, were the impetus behind creating this. but there were lots of people at St. Paul's and at RCD and at Trinity Center who had to really hang in there. Sophia talked about the long view, that it takes a long time. You have to be patient. You have to be able to hang in there. And this group of people really did. And they created this beautiful, beautiful home for people. And the home is not just their permanent home, but it's also created the space where Trinity Center operates. And we're like a little house. When you have housing, you have the ability to take a shower and do your laundry for free if you're lucky. And you have a place to store your prized possessions, and you have a table you can sit at and welcome people to. And you can watch TV if you want to. And you can shelter in place from COVID. So these are all important parts of housing. And it's also a place where you can welcome other companions to your life. The pets and other companions that people experiencing homelessness often have. That's really important too. That can really be an obstacle for people if they can't find housing where their animal companion can be. Many times they would rather stay out on the street, which seems antithetical, but when you understand that that is their living, breathing companion, the only other being in the world that cares, you can kind of see why that would be important. So here are some of the shots also of the beautiful apartment building. This is the house that Love built. Faith community with an affordable housing developer and a nonprofit were able to combine resources to gather public and private resources to build this home. And if this group of people can do it, any group of people can do it. I really, really believe that. So in the name of community that's created not only at Trinity Center, but in the apartment buildings, let's keep doing it. Let's do all the things we can to help our friends and neighbors have a safe place to be for a day, for a night, for a week, for the rest of their lives. Yeah, I've seen it happen. I wasn't actually part of it, but it's my honor to bear witness to the fact that it can happen. That's it. I'm done.
Okay.
Stopping sharing. There we go.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. So I want to make sure we get to all the questions that have come up in the chat. So I'm going to ask one or two more questions of our panelists before we move into Q&A. So what would you say is the most pressing issue facing the unhoused community?
The most pressing issue I would name actually may not be for those who are literally unhoused at the moment, but overall, when you look at homelessness, and it's the fact that community members are going homeless or losing their housing at 2 to 3 times the rate as we are able to rehouse them. And so really the most pressing thing and mentioned is incorporated into some of my work is around homelessness prevention. I would name homelessness prevention as one of the biggest factors and most important things that if we can create more resources for rental assistance, we can create more resources and supports and lawyers for legal services and eviction defense. If we can create more supportive services that wrap around, that involve the things that are around mental health, that are having to do with the non-bill paying factors that contribute to the housing crisis, that help people actually sustain their housing. We can increase income to make sure that people can stay stable when they do get service. Prevention is what I would say is most crucial to the overall drivers of ending homelessness, so that the people we do help get off the street can stay off the street, and that the numbers overall will finally decrease because we've stopped people from going down that downward spiral in the first place.
I would say that all the things that Demetrius mentioned in terms of services people need in order to keep them housing stable and prevent prevent homelessness from being a part of a individual's story and journey are important, clearly. But on another level, what is the most critical need facing the unhoused is something else that Demetrius referenced, which is that we don't have enough quality affordable homes. He said, you know, folks are becoming homeless at 2 to 3 times the rate that the community is able to find new housing for people, and that's a crime. From a religious perspective, we would say that's a sin. And you know, what solves homelessness? Fundamentally, it's a home. People have many people have other issues in their lives, mental health issues or physical issues, or they've, you know, been survivors of domestic violence or other things, and they need other services and support. But you can't effectively really do that with a person or with a family unless they have a stable place to call home. And so what solves homelessness is a home. And it's amazing how many people don't make that connection in their minds, because they get so wrapped up in, oh, but the drug treatment or the alcohol treatment or the domestic violence issues or the this or the that. Well, yes, those are all critical pieces to work on, but you have to start with the foundation of safe, secure shelter.
Yep. I completely second Demetrius and Sophia. Prevention and keeping people in their housing and creating more housing, super important. But when I thought about this question, honestly, to be really, really just really blunt, what people need who are unhoused is they need to stay alive. That's the issue that they're facing every single day, staying alive, staying safe. And I liken it sometimes to the AIDS crisis, where we had to keep people alive while we worked on a treatment so that we could solve the health aspects. And we were doing needle exchange. Remember how unpopular needle exchange was, clean needles? Because the goal was to just keep people alive long enough to treat them. And it's sort of like that. And maybe I come from my very daily experience at Trinity Center of looking in the faces and looking at their tiredness and looking at their beaten downness sometimes. And at the same time, the amazing generosity and hope and grace that the members at Trinity Center show for each other. But that's what they need. They need to stay alive while we get the rest of the solutions for them. And I think that's a role for faith communities, as not every faith community is going to be able to build a big, beautiful apartment building, but every faith community can be part of keeping our unhoused, marginalized, almost on the edge siblings from falling off into that reality. And when they are in that reality, help us feed them, help us make sure they're safe, help us make sure they have clean food, and then help us build the societal issues so that they have the treatment they need for mental health or substance abuse issues. So it's part of a big whole, but there's something that every person of faith and every community of faith can do. And so that's why I'm really glad to have been able to be here with everybody tonight.
Awesome. Thank you. These are some good answers. I appreciate it. So we're gonna move into Q&A. There's some questions that were posed in the chat that I wanted to pose to our panelists. The first question is last year, Senator Wiener's bill to make it easier for California faith communities to build affordable housing on their properties failed, but it is likely to be reintroduced. With or without this legislation, how can faith organizations build affordable housing?
I'd like to start then. Just before I get to that question, I want to mention on the last subject, every faith community, every person should know about, in Oakland especially, a program called Keep Oakland Housed, just as it's spelled, Keep Oakland Housed, and the website is keepoaklandhoused.org. So it's a homelessness prevention program, multi-million-dollar program that provides those three things I outlined, being emergency financial assistance, which is flexible to more than just rent. It's whatever the financial piece is that's causing the crisis. Then you can have legal services all the way up to full representation, as well as some of those supportive services from as little as budget planning, because sometimes people do have enough money, they just need help in how to organize it and plan it. All the way to housing navigation and finding a different place for you to live if that's what's best for you. So keepoaklandhoused.org, you should know. If you know people in San Francisco, the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development have a parallel program that is a part of COVID response. And, in general, this model, there's work going on to scale it to the region. So just want to name those two. And Alameda County also has a sister program called Alameda Secure. And I believe I saw Teresa from Central Legal on here. Central Legal is a great resource for you in that if you live outside of Oakland, but in Alameda County and need those supports. So that infomercial aside, to Doug's question, there's still are many ways that have not changed as far as communities being able to develop affordable housing. Leslie's going to be able to answer this question the best. But there is a program actually that Bay Area LISC is running around building the capacity of faith-based and community-based organizations to be able to develop housing. One thing I always like to share is that faith communities sometimes don't develop because we don't realize how much technical expertise is needed to play the game of affordable housing. So finding development consultants, actual coaches, pre-development costs and things like that. This program will list, they're getting ready to start a second round of that program. I believe it's lisc.org is their site for Bay Area LISC. And they're looking for organizations, again, faith-based organizations especially, but also community-based organizations that have land, that are interested in developing, and at least have agreement from their congregation to do so. And as well as they just have free resources that tell you how to do that. So even if you go to their website, you can get some initial resources.
Anyone else want to tackle the question? Anyone else want to tackle the question?
Well, I don't have any big answers.
Okay.
But we are seeing some smaller efforts. There's a congregation in Orinda trying to use some of its land to build some more senior housing. It can be little stuff, There's another congregation out in Pleasant Hill, I think, trying to use part of its parking lot for vans. That may be a temporary solution for somebody, but it's a solution, it's a start. So again, it doesn't have to be big and grand, it can be small, but I'm really excited to hear Demetrius's news that LISC is in the mix and open to other opportunities in creating that, because it is hard. Affordable housing is hard to develop, it's hard to sustain, there's no joke about that. But so you go into it with your eyes wide open and with all the right people to help back you up and give you that technical expertise.
Okay.
The thing I'd add is, it's important, especially for the short term, for faith communities to think beyond the traditional development of affordable housing into more innovative solutions. The faith community right now is actually on the leading edge of some of our most innovative solutions when it comes to like tiny homes, or also called accessory dwelling units, ADUs. So I would get connected with the Firm Foundation. Firm Foundation is a nonprofit that was created that came out of First Presbyterian Church of Hayward, who organized the movement of volunteers and architects and et cetera to build 6 tiny homes that they have, put foundation to and put on their church's parking lot. And they created a nonprofit to help build the capacity of other congregations and faith communities that want to put tiny homes on their lots. And they went through all the hard learning lessons of zoning and working with government and financing and et cetera, and using the community to finance that. So Firm Foundation, First Presbyterian Church of Hayward, that work is important. EBHO is a resource. Actually, some EBHO I know is in partnership with Trinity Center when it first got started. So EBHO has its membership base of affordable housing developers, of architects as well, that can have initial feasibility conversations with you. And then I would say get connected to your local Interfaith Council. The Interfaith Council of Alameda County runs a safe car park program at Westside Missionary Baptist Church in West Oakland. Also a part of a tiny home program of which Firm Foundation's work, and also Youth Spirit Artworks. If you drive by the Coliseum, you see that beautiful painted gate and all the tiny homes there. Those are our membership organizations. The Interfaith Council Contra Costa County has the warm shelter, I'm missing the formal name, forgive me, y'all that are on here. Winter Nights Shelter, there it is, that they do in Contra Costa County using congregations, parking lots again, or even their facilities to help keep people warm and keep them alive, as Leslie said.
Okay. Thank you. So the next question that we got from the chat is, can you share an example of an interfaith space focus on housing justice that you have worked on that wasn't Christian centered, and your takeaway on the importance of that interfaith work?
Can you repeat that question one more time?
Yeah. Can you share an example of an interfaith space focused on housing justice that you have worked in that wasn't Christian centered, and your takeaway on the importance of that interfaith work?
One example I can share is iCare, which is an interfaith activity where right now it's a little different because of COVID. They can't actually come and volunteer or show up in these interfaith groups to be together and contributing to something. But for instance, at Trinity Center, as these interfaith groups are coming together, they're providing bagged breakfasts for us. It's a small thing, but it's bringing people across different faith community lines to work together to at least solve some of the immediate hunger needs. So it's just one small example, but Trinity Center is certainly benefiting from that.
Okay. All right, we can move on to the next question. We're getting close on time. As more and more people lose their homes due to COVID and other reasons, how do you stay focused and strong? What is your faith-based self-care? That's relevant to everybody. Don't all jump at once.
Yeah, self-care, so critical. Thank you, Jessica, for that question. It's funny that I'm jumping in first here because often I would say my self-care practices leave something to be desired. I work hard on it, but it's still it's a work, right? But honestly, my most consistent, and I would say probably my most helpful faith-based self-care practice is to just spend some time in prayer every morning. And I can feel the difference it makes, not just in my spirit, but also in my body. Um, when I've done that versus when I haven't done that because I've been running out the door or, whatever. It makes a huge difference. And when I'm able to pray in the morning before starting my work day, um, if you know if and as I run into a difficult situation during the day, um, I'm able to stop for a second and remember my prayer in the morning and recenter. So that's been most helpful to me.
I'll jump right in there and second that as well. And I have to confess, having an active prayer life has only recently been part of my life, and it sure is making a difference now. And I would also add to that, there are days when I have to let the members minister to me. People hear me say this all the time. As much as I give, I get back tenfold, 100-fold from our members. I remember one time during the winter, we're still having to have people eat outdoors as a COVID safety precaution. And there was one day it started raining during lunch. We threw up our pop-up tents, but all the tables were wet and the chairs were wet. And we were out there with our towels trying to dry it off. And it just feeling so disheartened that the best we could do for people was dry off a table so they could eat in the rain. That was really hard. But one of the members pulled one of our other staff aside and said, "Thank you. We know it's hard. We understand. We appreciate it. What you're doing is not going unnoticed." And when I heard that story, I just blubbered the whole rest of the day. So it's letting the people who supposedly need our help give back and help us. It heals everybody. So.
Yeah. And what I will say to that, how do you stay strong and keep going? One of the most radical things faith and being people of faith encourages us to do is rest. Especially in multiple traditions that have some form of a Sabbath or some holy day where it's actual commandment to stop. And it's a commandment to rest and not to work. And I think the difficulty of it is the discipline of organizing our lives in a way that we get all our work in 6 days. And that's really what it is. But when you allow yourself to rest and use it to connect with God, to connect with spirit, your family, yourself, that is a part of the weekly maintenance that allows you to keep going, that allows you to recalibrate, not even say pay attention to your spiritual calendar. In the Christian tradition, we just began Lent, and this is a time to enter into a time of reflection, repentance, where we've fallen short, to recalibrate. So when our traditions offer us a time to do that, we should take advantage of it, and allow what comes from it, both strategy for us personally and the work, to move us forward.
Thank you. Self-care is important. Yeah. I don't know if you all follow the NAP ministry, but I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. That rest is a part of how we're going to liberate ourselves. Yes. So I'm glad you all have practices in place and are taking care of yourselves. Yeah. All right. So before we go, I wanted to thank our panelists for their time and for showing up and being their awesome selves. But I also wanted to get us in gear. So we're talking a lot about housing justice, about our faith, our spirituality, and how that's important to us. So now we need opportunities to put those into action. So before we go, I wanted to let you all know about the work that we've been doing to give you some ways to be involved. So right now, the Faith and Justice Committee is working on a faith zoning bill, which will allow faith-based institutions to build affordable housing on their property by right without having to go through the painstaking process of rezoning. So far, we've been holding legislative meetings to educate our assembly people about the bill, and more are welcome to join us. We see the campaign expanding as the bill comes to fruition. We are also been closely monitoring the encampment management policy that the city of Oakland just passed, affecting curbside communities and where they can live throughout the city. The Faith and Justice Committee plans to make public comments at the next Life Enrichment Committee meeting regarding the policy to ensure that those most impacted by the policy have a say in what happens. And if you want to be a part of our Faith and Justice Committee, first you need to become an EPHO member. So we encourage everyone to sign up to be an EPHO member. And our next meeting for Faith and Justice is next Thursday, February 25th at 9:30 a.m. And if you would like to join, please contact me at Ronnie, RONNIE @epho.org. Yep. So for any last parting words, I think we're all good. But I just wanted to give a big heartfelt thank you to everyone. Yeah, and if you have any questions about membership, contact Kiki. All right, have a good evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Bye,
Ronnie. Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
It's been great being with you.
Thank you, everyone, for this opportunity. Stay in touch with us.
Mhm. Yep.
You want a Diet Coke from McDonald's for breakfast, but think it's too early. And then you realize it isn't.
Commercials. That's what happened.
It's all part of life. Are we